Good to see you working hard out and about. Do you meet Sir Keir Starmer's narrow definition of what a working person is? I'm not sure either of us qualify.
Well, I think working people are some of those who have suffered most under the last 14 years of the Conservatives. You know, the tax burden is at a 70-year high, wages have been stagnant, economic growth has been on the floor. And I think working people across the country, realise the impact of all these Conservative decisions that they've had. And that's why I think so many people that we're talking to at this election, even those who voted Conservative before, are saying, yeah, it's time for change. We need a change of government.
Yeah, what a lot of rubbish. There's so many people who are working people, so many people, it just doesn't take sweat on your brow. And do you not realise the insult? What you mean is poor people, say it's poor people you're talking about, because working people come in all shapes and sizes.
Well, no, this is people right across the country who are feeling the impact of the Conservatives in government. It's not just people who are, who have the least amount of money. It's also people on middle incomes are feeling the squeeze of the Conservatives. And I think that's
but that's not what your boss is saying. Your boss is saying these are people who can't afford to write a cheque. So what he means is poor people.
Well, people who don't have the great resilience if they're hit by a shock and they might, in their lives. They might not have that great resilience to get through. And I think that people feel more precarious now because of the state of the economy, because of the fact that taxes are so high, because of the fact that wages have been flatlining. That's what people feel, and people want greater security. And I think it's absolutely right for people to want that security for them and their families, that economic security, to know that if something does come along which is unexpected, people are not going to be knocked off course. And that's one reason why today, for instance, we're talking about energy bills and our plans to bring down energy bills for good by £300. The energy bills crisis has been something which has really impacted families across the country, and so bringing those energy bills down gives people greater personal security.
If I may say, there are cracks appearing in your claim that you're not raising taxes for working people. There's triple lock, no increases in income tax, VAT and national insurance, when you're only defining working people as someone who relies on public services and does not have savings. The Resolution Foundation calculate 2 in 3 people have savings of more than £1,000, and YouGov say that 1 in 8 people use private healthcare. So Ian Duncan-Smith says that this is really showing your true colours. This isn't levelling up, it's levelling down, he says. The old socialist is there. The man who supported Jeremy Corbyn is still alive and well.
We know that working people across the country are impacted by the Conservatives' record when it comes to income tax, when it comes to all of the taxation that they put up across the board. And that's why it's so important for us to go into the election with this commitment not to increase income tax, national insurance and VAT. And I think that's something that people will want to see. But I think the other point to make, which is really important, is that in the long run, the way to bring taxes down, because, we want taxes to be lower, the way to bring taxes down is to get the economy growing. And that's what economic growth is so central to what we're saying going into the election.
What you're not saying, though, and you're not ruling out, is some sort of rise in others' taxes, these stealth taxes, these wealth taxes. Mixed opinion, depending on who we've been speaking to over the last few days, about whether or not you're ruling out an increase in council tax. Can you put your colours on the mast? Because I know that your leader and Rachel Reeves are refusing to rule it out, but others, including Jonathan Reynolds yesterday, saying it was off the table.
Well, we've been very clear about council tax banding, that we're not looking at rebanding for council tax. But actually, the more important point here is to point at what's in the manifesto. And in the manifesto, as well as the triple lock that I mentioned about income tax, national insurance and VAT not going up, there's some very specific tax changes we would make, whether that's to the windfall tax, to non-DOMs or to tax avoidance. And those are the only changes we want to make to fund the immediate injections of investment we want in public services. There is nothing else in our manifesto that requires any tax changes beyond those that we set out.
So you're saying you're not looking at it. As far as I'm aware, that doesn't mean you're ruling it out. But anyway, what about the 2-child cap on child benefit? This is causing a lot of problems for you. What's your own opinion on this? Because some of your colleagues have described it as obscene, inhumane, punitive and heinous, but it looks like you're keeping it.
Well, look, the economic reality means that we cannot pledge to scrap the 2-child limit. But what we are very clear about is that we need to take child poverty head on if we get into government, which is why we've committed to having a government approach to tackling child poverty, to bringing that down and to incorporate many of the commitments we have already made. For instance, around breakfast clubs, around making sure that we deal with no-fault evictions, around bringing energy bills down, as I've mentioned, all things that will help children who are suffering in poverty, because we desperately need to tackle child poverty. The last Labour government did it. If we have a Labour government after July the 4th, we'll do it again, but we'll set out that plan in government by bringing all parts of government together.
It's interesting, talking about children, Keir Starmer yesterday admitted that 100,000 children with special needs will be affected by your plans to change VAT on private schools. And reading in the papers this morning that 95% of state schools are already full. And it's a question, again, I've asked a number of your colleagues in recent weeks, what exactly do you plan to do with the at least, the most generous expectations that 40,000 children that can no longer afford this huge hike in private school fees, where are you going to put them?
Well, look, without going into that number in too much detail, that number is, I think, in the future, different decisions that people might make rather than a change straight away. And I think what's really clear to me, if you look at what's happened to private school fees over the last 10 years, they've gone up well above inflation, and that hasn't had an impact on the number of people going to private schools. I think it's also really important to point out that the change in VAT, it is a decision for the schools themselves as businesses, whether or not to pass that on, and that is something that they should be thinking about, and think about how that will impact their parents.
Well, you say that. All the private schools that we've been reading from and who've been lobbying hard against this say they don't run huge profits. It's such a nonsense, and that's why it's illegal to tax education in the European Union, in all European countries and other countries. Nigel Farage's party, Reform, is suggesting that there should be tax breaks for parents that are relieving the state by choosing to pay for their children to be educated. That's a progressive policy. You claim to be a progressive party. Isn't yours just going to be levelling down education?
It's a progressive policy to use the money that we would raise from VAT on private school fees to invest in state schools right across the country. We want to invest in the 93% of schools that are state schools. We want to invest in extra teachers, extra training, in those nursery places at schools. That's progressive, using that money from the VAT on private schools to invest in state schools across the country. It's always a difficult decision when it comes to changing taxes, but that's the right decision to make it fairer right across the country.
But those parents who send their children to private school, the Labour Party wouldn't classify them as hard-working people then?
Well, people, wherever they send their children to school, people often pay income tax, will pay national insurance, people pay VAT whenever they buy something in a shop. All of those three taxes, we have an ironclad commitment not to increase. So anyone affected by those taxes knows in the Labour Party we will not increase them if we win the election.
James, we'll leave it there. Thank you for competing with the sirens going off around you there and all that hubbub. I'm sure you didn't hear. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We'll say goodbye to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Valiantly battling on there.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's an awful racket down round Parliament Square there. Horrendous. But so, I mean, there you've got a situation. You are hard-working if you've no money. You are not hard-working if you use the sweat of your brow to send your kids to private school. That's basically the definition.